choice is either to go along with the coalition's recommendation to deny the increase, which is what we're doing here, and that's what's up for approval tonight, or essentially do nothing, which has effectively the same effect, because what you wouldn't want to do is go counter to that agreed upon negotiated resolution to this, because these attorneys with the Encore City Steering Committee and attorneys with Encore, they work together. If this thing is denied across the board, it then gets appealed to the PUC. In the meantime, the parties try to negotiate a more favorable settlement.
Okay, so has the steering committee, have they ever won one of these battles?
Well,
in recent times?
Yes, they win by very frequently coming in with a lower increase in rates, but rarely do we have a zero increase, right? $0 increase.
Okay.
Right.
All right. I was just curious.
But there's often and usually a negotiated settlement that takes place. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
You bet.
Nothing else.
Nothing else. Councilmember Driscoll?
No, thank you.
All right. We will move on to A2, receive an update from the Code Enforcement Task Force. Mr. Leo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Leo Bonanno. I am your Code Enforcement Manager, and I have a brief presentation to share with you about the results of the Code Enforcement Task Force. And let me just pull that up for you. Okay. Well, as I'm sure most of you recall, earlier this year, Mayor Dye initiated the creation of the Code Enforcement Task Force to review a number of codes that are currently in place. He made the comment at that time that codes should be reviewed regularly to make sure they're still relevant, and that was a very valid comment. And so we went into this, of course, with that in mind. The goal of our task force when we got started was to, of course, review existing codes and provide recommendations for changes that were anticipated to be coming down the line. Just a quick hello. We do have some of our task members here in the room today. Mr. Bronson Blackson was our task force chairperson. He's in the room today. Our Councilman John Norwood was our council liaison during this task force. And then, of course, there was myself, the facilitator. Just to be clear before we get into this, I want to make sure folks understand that I did not consider myself part of the task force since its creation. It was my job, as I saw it, to collect information from the representatives that you all chose and then bring it back to you today, which is what's happening. So what you're going to see today is not a reflection of the Code Enforcement Division or my opinions or stance on codes. This is a reflection of all of the hard work that the task force members did and their recommendations to you. So I just want to make sure that's clear with all of you before we get started. With that in mind, in order to meet our goals, we had several purposes to affect here. And of course, in all code enforcement matters, our first concern is health and safety. The state of Texas actually defines code officers like myself as those individuals that are responsible for enforcing health and safety codes above all things. And so that was our primary concern while we looked at various codes. Then, of course, there were other, in looking at codes, well, how does one look at a code? Is it clear? Is it enforceable? Is it strict enough or too strict? These kind of various elements of the code. Is it relevant anymore? Is it still something that we should be thinking about? All of these come into play as we examine codes. And then finally, the last aspect that we looked at was aesthetics. Farmers Branch is not alone in using the Code Enforcement Division to play a role in aesthetic preservation in the city, and we did consider that as we were going through codes as well. The other thing we examined was the general behavior and assumptions that our neighbors and citizens in Farmers Branch are coming to the table with. What is it that they think the codes say? What is it that they think is appropriate behavior as it relates to the codes? Is there a way we can make that more clear? Is there a way that we can educate people better? A lot of that was discussed during the task force as well. The task force members, it's not easy to run a task force in that, or any group of people, because as always, we come to the table with our own perceptions and paradigms in mind. So the task force was given explicit instructions to essentially step out of their shoes and empathize with others in the community that may not have been in the room. Those that owned homes were encouraged to think like renters. Those that have been here a long time were encouraged to think like new residents. They were given explicit instructions and explained to that they were in the task force to represent everyone, not just their own personal views. And they did fantastically at that. As we spent more and more time together, they consistently spoke about the well-being of the entire community and not just themselves. So that they did do a great job with that. That last sentence there is a little note to, we did have one or two wallflowers in the room, at least to start. And part of my process in getting information out of them and bringing it to you was making sure everyone participated. So that first meeting or two, we had a few quiet folks, but they learned pretty fast that if you stay quiet for too long, Officer Bonanno is going to call on you. So they did great. So by the end of the task force, everyone had an ample opportunity to talk and participate. And again, they all did a great job. So with that in mind, we come to some of the results that the task force found. And I will say before we get into this, you'll hear me say several times during this presentation, the task force felt A, the task force felt B. What I mean by that is that a majority of the task force felt one way or another. I'm sure you can understand that having 10 or 15 people in a room, it's not always likely that they're all going to agree. And so as you hear me say that phrase, the task force, we agreed at the beginning of the task force that would mean I would present the task force findings as a majority. So when you hear me say that phrase, the task force feels, we're talking about a majority of people in the room. Okay? The first thing that came up was probably the most obvious, which is some codes, not all codes, but some, did suffer from a lack of clarity and readability. Some terms were not defined, leaving them open to interpretation. Other codes were difficult to read or difficult to find at all, which created confusion amongst the task members. And of course, as if they were representing the public, we could fairly assume the public would be confused as well. There are some examples there, like the terms trash, garbage, and refuse are not defined in this law, but we are using these every day to enforce various trash-related issues. Well, I don't think I probably have to tell you that one man's trash is another man's treasure. Without a definition for trash, it can be a debate between a code officer and a homeowner or a resident as to what really is trash, what is treasure. So we look for definitions to help guide us in that way. Another example, of course, is inoperable vehicles. This is an issue we have in several places in the code. Inoperable vehicles and junk vehicles are covered quite nicely in the code, but they're not in this code. We're talking about Chapter 56 today, mainly, the Property Maintenance Code. But inoperable vehicles, which are a property maintenance issue, are in another chapter entirely. They're in Chapter 34 of the Environmental Code. If you were a member of the public looking for this information, the last place you would probably look is a law titled Environment for inoperable and junk vehicles. So these are two examples of things not being particularly reader-friendly, and the task force thinks that we can do better with that. A level of enforceability is an issue. We discussed this. Part of the exercises that we did together were that I asked task force members not only to put themselves into the shoes of other residents, but I also asked them to put themselves behind the wheel of a code enforcement truck and see the city as we do. And when you do that, it became quite clear that some ordinances, some regulations were very difficult to enforce from our position. And this example that you have here on your screen is one of them. It is a somewhat common complaint, especially with large vehicles, campers and things. If they don't move for a long time, if neighbors see wires and things coming out, the assumption is made that someone is living inside. And the law currently does not allow that. So we will get complaints about folks living in vehicles. Well, the issue there is, even though it's clearly against the law, it is almost impossible to enforce that, because a code officer from behind their steering wheel in their truck cannot see what's going on inside the camper or the RV. Sure, we see plugs, but there are plenty of people that leave their plugs in to charge various facets of their camper. So is that really evidence that someone's living in there? The code also doesn't define what living is. Is living staying there overnight? Is living 1 week, 2 weeks? If grandma and grandpa come to visit the grandkids for a month or two and they decide to stay in their RV, is that living? Is that illegal? The code doesn't say. And so what we're left with is a regulation that is very clear, but also difficult or impossible to enforce for us. So that was another issue. Redundancies were another issue that we ran across. The most obvious one that we discussed while we were together is that first example there. The concept of stair maintenance comes up 4 different times in 4 different places. And it says almost exactly the same thing every time. It says what you would expect. Stairs have to be safe. Handrails have to be safe. The stairs have to be able to carry the load they're intended to carry. And it says it over and over and over again in 4 different places. Well, the redundancy just makes the document inefficient. It's needlessly long. If you were to read this document and come across the first or second occurrence, you now feel compelled to read the entire document to see if there are any more things you might miss. So redundancies are just a waste of time as far as the reader is concerned. And so we felt like, the task force felt like, it would be best to eliminate redundancies and put these regulations all in one place. Another interesting code that we found was, we all know that trash and debris is a significant safety hazard. The state says so, and so does the city's codes. However, in one part of the property maintenance code, trash is forbidden, as it should be, and it needs to be cleaned up as soon as possible, and rightly so. But in another part of the code, it's actually specifically allowed to be outside for 7 days. It very clearly says that, which is a little bit mind-boggling, and it was mind-boggling to everyone in the task force. When they asked me questions like, why is that? I did not have an answer as to why something so significantly health hazard and such a significant health hazard would be allowed to remain out in the open for 7 days. So again, we have this. Not only are topics coming up more than once, but in this case, now they're starting to conflict with each other. Whereas the staircase example, it was just the same language over and over. So again, it makes the document more difficult to read. The next example was necessity, as I stated at the beginning. Is this code really necessary? Or is a code necessary that we do not have? And the list of your examples here explains both. For some reason, there's an exemption in the code that says that you are required to have screens for your windows up until the 4th floor. And then an exemption kicks in and says if you're on the 5th or higher floor, you no longer have to do that. We discussed this a little bit. Mr. Blackson came into a lot of assistance here because he had some historical knowledge about this. And it was his suggestion, well, maybe this exemption was created because at the time there were no buildings over 4 or 5 stories in the city. If that is true, then it doesn't seem to apply anymore because we have a number of buildings that are now over 4 and 5 stories tall. This can also be considered a safety issue, a minor one to most people, but mosquitoes do carry Zika and West Nile virus, and we do want to keep those out of people's homes. So why does the code believe that a mosquito will try to get into a 4th-story window, but not a 5th-story window? It just didn't seem to make sense where this exemption came from. And so the task force, again, thought, well, if there's no reason for it, it should be taken out. The other example that we have here is just the opposite. There is a situation that has occurred a number of times that we have no regulation for. For example, we've gotten a number of complaints in my office, not too many, but plenty to get my attention, of trash from one property blowing into neighbors' properties. And that can be incredibly frustrating for that neighbor. That neighbor, in their mind, and in my mind as well, is not doing anything wrong. They're maintaining their property. But a neighbor's trash, and including commercial neighbors and dumpsters and things, is blowing across into their yard. And when they call code enforcement to complain about that, we have to deliver the unfortunate news that in our world, we are forced to deal with violations where they are, not who caused them. And so it is actually the caller who is in violation. We explain the rules. They typically take care of it themselves. We do not get involved. But they're left understandably upset. Why is it that I'm in trouble because of what they're doing or not doing? So in an example like this, some kind of regulation stating your dumpster has to be closed, your trash cart or recycling cart has to remain closed. If they're overfilling, you have to make other arrangements because on occasion, these things do blow open and spill out and damage your neighbor's property in the process. So, and again, that's one of those things that as a code enforcement office, we can't help. So a regulation like that would allow us to hold the proper property owner accountable. So, some standards in the property maintenance code and some others we looked at were seen as overly strict to the point that they resembled more of an HOA level of enforcement. One of the examples is that first one you see, all address numbers must be on a building. The code says that. This is another code, by the way, that appears 3 times in 3 different codes. And it says you must have address numbers on your building. It says it very clearly. If we were to enforce that as it is written, 50% of the homes in this town would have to go out and buy house numbers because their numbers are currently on the curb or on their mailbox. That seems reasonable to the task force. That seems good enough. But the code doesn't allow for it. So this is an example of a code that seemed needlessly strict. Another example in the photo you have there is currently the code requires that grass be cut once it goes above 8 inches tall. And there are no exceptions to that. Well, there were two results from this discussion. One, just the measurement of 8 inches was seen as too strict. The number 12 inches came out and was pretty much accepted by the group as more reasonable. The second issue is, again, there were no exemptions to this grass height requirement. Well, there are some grasses, like the one in the photo, that are meant to grow tall. They're meant to be more shrub-like. They're not regular grass as we all understand it to be. But there is no exemption for that. And so we feel, as in the task force, that an exemption should be in place for native grasses, native Texas grasses that are meant to grow tall and lush and be more of a landscaping plant, not just grass or turf. So this is an example of something that they saw overly strict. The discussion of trash carts did come up as well. The folks in the task force, with a few exceptions, did feel that the current regulations are too strict. That as long as trash and recycling bins were pulled away from the street in a timely manner, because they can represent safety hazards if they're left out at the road, that was good enough. And so the side of the house, the rear of the house was okay. It didn't seem to matter to the task force that they were still visible. However, as you probably know, our current code says they have to be invisible, which can be difficult for some homeowners to hide, depending on corner lots, chain link fences. Not everyone has a place to hide trash and recycling carts. So the task force felt that maybe leniency in this area was appropriate. And again, forcing such a strict standard was very reminiscent of an HOA, and they were adamant that we not treat residents in that manner. One of the most significant topics discussions we had was on weaponized language. Several of the task force members had anecdotes about code enforcement being used in the past to kind of wedge in between neighbor versus neighbor situations. And they thought that code enforcement should be removed from those situations as much as possible. An example of one of the regulations that forces us to get in between residents is this glare regulation. This glare regulation says that if light, and I'll just paraphrase it for you, but if light is so bright that it is disturbing to a neighbor or a member of the public, like someone driving down the street, my office is to get involved. Well, going back to the beginning of this presentation, code enforcement officers, by definition, are to think of safety first, health and safety first. So the task force felt that, well, a glare could create some kind of traffic hazard. It might affect someone's ability to see and drive at night. So they could see the safety issue there. However, if the glare is not hazardous to someone driving by, but simply annoying to a neighbor, that was best left between the two of them. Code enforcement should, in their feelings, not get involved in that. And so in their recommendation, the glare regulation would stay, but language about adjacent properties would be taken out. So that's an example of what they felt was language perhaps not intended, but the unintended side effect of being weaponized against neighbors. So. Another thing that came up several times as we talked about the stringency of various codes was what kind of discretion an officer has. Well, depending on the circumstances, a well-trained officer can have a significant amount of discretion if the code allows it, depending on how a particular regulation is written. We looked at fences for quite a bit, and I have an example for you here. The law currently says that fences shall not lean more than 10 degrees. Well, that's a very specific measurement, and it doesn't take into account other variables. Is there a pool behind that fence? Is there an animal that might escape should that fence fall, et cetera, et cetera? So the more we talked about it, the more the task force started to lean into, well, instead of being so specific and so rigid, why not let the code officer examine the situation and decide what's best? As you can see in the three examples I've given you, you've got three very different fence violations. You've got a leaning fence, a fallen fence, and then the most significant is a broken fence around a pool. Well, leaving these situations to an officer's discretion, it's probably obvious which one we would deal with first, which is, of course, the pool. The next one would be the one in the middle. Why? Because depending on where that fence is, it could be a security issue. And then, of course, the one on the left, on my left, it hasn't fallen. Perhaps I don't feel like it's going to fall anytime soon. So it might be one of those worth watching, but not writing anyone up for, not bringing someone to court, just keeping an eye on it. And so this is, again, an example of the task force trusting code officers to use their discretion, and again, to let safety trump all other things. There was a proposed policy change discussed on one of our last nights together, and it was the topic of anonymous complaints. Our office currently accepts anonymous complaints of all types. Complainants do not have to leave any information. They can simply call and give us an address and a problem, and we will investigate it. Well, we brought up this discussion in the task force meetings and asked all the members how they felt about that. And the task force overwhelmingly spoke against anonymous complaints. They were against the practice of a code enforcement office accepting anonymous complaints. They felt, in some circumstances, that it was a kind of intrusion, that if you weren't willing to put your name to your complaint, then why should we take it seriously? That kind of thing. There was also some feelings about, well, how do you know that these people even live in our town? How do you know that they live in my neighborhood? If they don't live in my neighborhood, why do we care what they think? It's not hurting them. Nothing I'm doing is hurting them. So this intrusive feeling that some of them expressed came out during this discussion. So by the end of the discussion, what they had made very clear to me was that they felt that my office should stop accepting anonymous complaints from the public, that only complaints that came directly to my office, our office, and had some kind of identifying information would be investigated. If complaints were received without some kind of identifying information, it would not be investigated as quickly as a proper complaint would be. Instead, you would be trusting the officer to see it next time around. It's really as simple as that. So after bringing this forward to administration, it was determined that based on the task force's feelings, that administration decided to support this view of anonymous complaints. And so I just want to make you aware of that. At the end of the process, I asked the Code Enforcement Task Force members 2 questions, which are up on your screen. What does success look like when codes are updated? And what does success look like? What is the purpose of code enforcement? Well, they came up with some great answers. I got some great responses via email, and don't panic. I'm not going to read this slide to you. But I would like to read that last paragraph because I think it sums it up very well, all of the responses that I received. Quote, the purpose of code enforcement is to support a safe and healthy work environment within the boundaries of a city and for its citizens. Code language should be logical, reasonable, easy to understand, and promote a safe and healthy living environment. Code should not be used punitively or as a fee-based revenue stream. It should not be confusing or conflicting doublespeak. It should not be difficult for a citizen to understand or for a code officer to defend. This person who shared this quote really summed everything up very well. All the answers I received were great, but you can see all of the elements that need to be there are there. Health and safety, fairness, a reasonable expectation from a citizen, and an ability to deal with problems by an officer. That answer ticks all 4 boxes, so that's the one I want to make sure that I shared with you today. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to thank all of our members, again, some of which are here today. They did great. They worked 12, 13 hours over these meetings without breaks, and they got a lot done. And I really appreciated the opportunity to work with them, and hopefully they found it educational and enjoyable while they spent some time with me. But here are those folks. And again, I thank them very much for participating. And if any of you have any questions about the results I've shared with you, I'm happy to answer them.
Well, first, Leo, I want to thank you for your effort and leadership here. It was exciting to watch the meetings I attended, and just, knowing the amount of research and prep work that you put in to make it easier for the task force members to evaluate things and be ready for each meeting was, definitely a contributing factor to what I would consider the success of this task force. But I'd also like to thank all the members. for your time, your energy, your interest, and the consideration that you put into all the things that we evaluated. I think it's very important because over the years it seemed like we always added and added and added and never revised or refined. So your leadership in taking a look at that and bringing it back to something that, as you summed up, is easier for our code enforcement officers to not only understand and evaluate, but to enforce. And for a job that has been one of the hardest to kind of hire for and keep employed, for many years, I think it's important that we gave clear direction to these officers and a path forward to where your success leads to our community's success. But I think that also, having a document that's easier for our residents to read and to understand and figure out when something comes up is definitely important. And so, I just appreciate everyone's time here. I know it was above and beyond and extra, but in order for us to improve our community, we need to look at documents like this with a little bit more frequency than we have in the past, much like the charter. Times change, our resident base changes, things that we look at in a community change, and we need to be on top of that and make sure that we're regulating ourselves the way that we as a community want to. So y'all's input was the most valuable, and I truly appreciate that. And Councilmember Norwood, you were the liaison, so I'll let you go next if you'd like.
Yeah, it was a good experience. I would echo the mayor's sentiment that you did a fantastic job in doing that. I did attend every meeting, and I tried my best, although it was hard at times, not to influence the conduct of the meeting, but to give a historical background or things council has encountered in this, and insert a little philosophy into it. I would like to just follow up on your anonymous complaint discussion, because one thing you didn't say was that by having a complainant's information, you're able to follow up.
Yes, that's absolutely right. There does happen on occasion where we will get a complaint, a code officer will get a complaint, respond, and we will not be able to see what the complainant has described. And so by having complainant information, we can reach out and ask for more help or information. I'm not seeing what you're seeing. Can you help me? And a complainant that wants to get the problem solved can team up with us, as it were, to make sure we find the problem. But you're absolutely right. Not every problem is staring you at the face while you're sitting behind the wheel of your truck. So.
Right, and I think the other important point is that even though you have the complainant's information, that is still not releasable, even to somebody who calls up and says, who submitted this? Give me, I want their name, that kind of thing. You still are not allowed to release that information. It's merely to have a record and to ensure that the person lives in the city and you are able to follow up.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. The state protects the identity of code complainants, so that information never leaves our office.
Right. I'd also like to commend the task force. I think that everybody came in with kind of an open mind. They did their homework. The discussions that we had, some I saw opinions change in the meeting, and we always reached some type of consensus, a greater than 50%. In fact, I really can't remember too many that were just right on the line of the 50%. Really, it was a group consensus. I'm not going to talk a whole lot more at this point, but I do want to allow, if it's okay with you, to allow Bronson Blackson, who was the chair of this meeting, to kind of give his perspective on the meeting also.
Absolutely. Mr. Blackson? Welcome to the other side of the table.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Mayor and Council. It feels good to stand on this side, actually. Whenever we started this, back when I was on council, I kind of felt like this was to really try to bring our code enforcement up to date. I kind of felt like it was really out of date. It was really kind of not stagnant, but just it really kind of needed some more life. And part of it was I wanted to sit and kind of hear what everyone had to say and hear what they kind of felt, because I had kind of an inside being on that side of the dais as to what it was like. But now I've spent the majority of my life over here, and I've wanted to see how they both feel. And there were a couple points that I really thought that I picked up and learned during this. And Leo shared this in the very first meeting. He said that our ordinances should focus on the health, safety, and welfare of our residents and our employers. And I look at some of the codes and things that we have, and I don't feel like they focus on the health, safety, and welfare of our employers. I feel like they more focus on beautifying certain areas or doing certain things. And when they do that, it starts targeting certain groups of people. And that's what really, really, really bothers me, is whenever you take something and it starts targeting certain groups of people. And so that was one of the things. And then, over the years, we've had incredible turnover in our code enforcement, and I think that's because there's no clear direction. The officers have no clear direction as to what they're supposed to be enforcing and what they're not supposed to be enforcing. And then a couple of the things about anonymous complaints is looking at the complaints that came from residents that don't live anywhere near where the complaint was filed or the property that had it filed against, and it was seeing that you had residents from different areas, complain that don't even live or reside or work in those areas. And it kind of just brought up the idea, well, what good is it doing? What good is the anonymous component doing for us? And then, I look at it as there was really no connection between the amount of code enforcement violations that our city writes and how beautiful our city is. And I think was a false connection that maybe past policies had, was that they thought that the more they wrote or the more they did, that they were going to be able to make our city more beautiful or pretty. And so that was a couple of things. But other than that, I really wanted to help see the subjectivity removed from the ordinances and really make it objective, where it was really clear as to what they were enforcing and really what they were doing. And if they had to sit there and think for more than 5 or 10 seconds, then obviously we have an issue. And so, other than that, I came out thinking differently about a couple of things. I thought I was really kind of focused on a couple different items, but, I came out thinking that, maybe the way I felt or the way I thought wasn't necessarily the only way. So I really, appreciate the opportunity, first off, and second, it was really kind of an eye-opening opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you. That's all I have, Mayor.
Okay. Councilmember Rotana.
Thank you, Mayor. And I also, I agree with everything the mayor said related to the task force. I think, I consistently would talk to, some of my delegates there, and they were just excited to be a part of the process. And I think more opportunities like this, especially under your leadership, Mayor, just to have the community be a part of that process and bring that anecdotal evidence is so important to move us forward in the right direction. And I would love for you, Leo, to, just for those watching, kind of go through what the next steps will be after this presentation, just to make sure that those listening kind of know what's gonna happen next.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. As I said in the beginning, the point of my being here today was to share with you the task force's feedback. Well, my office does have its own feedback and recommendations, but up until now, I have kept them in my office. The reason for that is I'm waiting to hear from the council.
Gotcha.
I need to know your reaction to what you've heard today so that I can make some suggestions in that vein. What I think, in my opinion, would be the most appropriate thing to do is to hear your feedback today, and then for me to work with the city attorney's office to adjust and rewrite the code in that, again, in the vein of what I hear from you today. To be frank, the faster we can do it, the better it is for everyone. It was largely agreed that what we have now isn't so great. But we do have a path. We are looking at a path right now that can get us to something really good. So the sooner we can go from where we are to that good, the better we'll be. So I'm hoping to hear some feedback from you all today that can get me started.
Definitely. And I think, and I speak for myself, I'm a very visual person, being able to see the changes from the task force and then the recommendations from staff, which may or may not, most likely I feel like they'll be pretty the same, but there may be a couple of pieces that staff may make recommendations. Just to see those differences, I think will help at least me in being able to kind of respond and say, I think, these are great, and as we continue to review the process. I think all in all, I think the way you broke it down, it makes it easy to understand into the focus areas that the task force was looking into. I loved what former council member Bronson said that removing the subjectivity was such a key factor in all of this. And I think the weaponizing piece was something that I know a lot of my residents always felt. And so I'm just so glad that that was brought up and by others, not even in my district. So I just recommendation that would help me. However, I'll defer to, the mayor and our liaison to figure out what would be best for us to be able to move forward with giving you the feedback that you need. And then my last question is, can you remind me the code fees that are collected? Can you remind me which bucket they go into as far as, do they go back into code enforcement for your processes, or where do those, or do they go to the municipal court? Where do those fees go?
I'm under the impression they go to the general fund.
Okay.
So
Okay. Sounds good. Thank you.
you're welcome.
And I think that's all I have, Mayor. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Just for my feedback, in terms of direction, it would be to incorporate the recommendations from the task force into the rewrite and use that as kind of a guidepost of make those suggestions come back to us so that we have something to truly evaluate in terms of what these changes actually look like. But I think that the feedback that the task force gave us should be a driving factor in how we're going to rewrite and the changes that you would implement. That would be at least my suggestion as we move forward and what I would support. Councilmember Lynn.
Thank you, Leo. Appreciate all the time that the members of the community that served on the task force put into this study. I'm very concerned by some of the findings. And Leo, I'm sure you know that because we spent time driving around the city. I'm not sure that there's anybody here that gets the number of calls and complaints about various things going on in the city, but I would like to share some comments just as it relates to the presentation that you made. So, yes, while health and safety of the public is number one, the aesthetics of our community is very important. It's important to a lot of people. And I'm not the type of person that wants to sit up here and have living in Farmers Branch so punitive that people can't afford to live here. I am not interested in fining people out of living in Farmers Branch. That is not my intent. When we had the whole recycling container discussion and the discussion of what's going to happen when people didn't put their bin back and they got a code violation, I had issues with that because I know people aren't going to do it, but is our goal to really find them and, as somebody used, a money grab for the city? And I don't believe that to be the case, but we have to ensure compliance as long as we have codes that are relevant to living in the city. So I do agree with you that there is a lack of clarity and conciseness in some of the codes. We have a city attorney. That's his job. And let him go back and redefine what needs to be cleaned up. Make it readable for somebody like me, that we can understand it. Make it simple. But the wordiness and the language of some of our codes, it is confusing, and I will let you all be the judge of where things need to be, because that's not my expertise. You mentioned specifically inoperable vehicles need to be in a specific section other than where they are right now. That's a concern because there are homes with inoperable vehicles, multiple vehicles, and neighbors complain about it. So we need to have something in our basket, our tool bag, that will allow us to address that sort of stuff. I'm concerned because most recently I've received a number of calls regarding a travel trailer that is on Pebble Beach. I even sent you out to go take a look. Regardless whether somebody is living in it or not, I think where it is parked is what is creating the issue for most of the residents around there that have complained. So, but the same could be said for people who have campers, RVs, travel trailers, motorhomes, and boats. There's a house that has 2 boats parked in the front drive. So how do we handle that? Is that really adding to the value of our city? And that would be more an aesthetic question, number one. But, you know, there are places to park these vehicles. And the front yard of your house, which was not designed for that to begin with, because when most of the homes in Farmers Branch, 80% of them, which are over 50 years old, they didn't have that sort of stuff. And so we need to probably address that and then encourage people to find more suitable storage facilities. On page 9 of your presentation, you mentioned address numbers must be placed on building. Well, they need to be placed on building or residence. And that's, you know, for first responder convenience as much as anything, because when you call for help, they need to know where they're going. And if you don't have house numbers on your house, and then how are they going to know? And in today's world, with as many package delivery services that are coming to homes, there's a concern there. You know, relying on numbers just being on a curb alone, that's probably hit or miss at best. And I doubt that 50% of the homes in Farmers Branch have numbers on their curb, but that's, I guess, a conversation for another time. But you want to make sure that, you know, whoever needs to get your house knows that they're getting to your house. So to remove that, I see that would be a detriment to all residents of the city.
May I, Councilman Lynn, may I jump
Sure.
in here just about that? I just want to make sure I'm clear. The regulation currently states that your numbers must be on your building. That is what the task force thought was too strict. They did not say building numbers are not necessary. Where they were headed was your numbers could be on or near your house. Like on your mailbox.
Could be on your
You
mailbox,
know what I'm
yeah.
saying? But they were not advocating no numbers.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that's something that could obviously be clarified.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
I get that.
Yes.
So I stand corrected.
Nope, that's okay.
So, you know, the high grass and weeds, I just drove by somebody who's got at least foot-high weeds on Valley View as I was coming here this afternoon. So, again, I don't know how having high grass and weeds, just like I don't know how having stumps in yards is going to add value to people's property or value to the city in general. And we've had discussion on stumps. So, you know, that's a concern. I do agree exempting native grasses probably makes best sense because we're starting to see more of that as people conserve and even as the former Sustainability Committee had recommended or encouraged people to start planting more of those type plants. So I don't have a problem with that. Regarding the weaponization of code enforcement, I've seen this firsthand. I don't believe it's as big of a factor as what some people think, but I am in agreement that it does happen. And so how do we deal with that? I thought previously, because of the number of calls that I get, that a lot of people want to remain anonymous. So they might call their council person and say, don't mention my name, but I got a problem with this and you need to do something about it. Well, okay. But then requiring people to give their name and information presents a whole nother set of issues. The main issue is that of retaliation, and that has happened in the city. And if need be, I can get people here or have people contact you to say that they've been a victim of that by your own department, by the previously run department. So that's a concern. I'm not sure how you get neighbors to get along because you can't force people to get along. And some neighbors are always going to be difficult. But I agree that they shouldn't be using code enforcement to solve their issues or to harass others. So I see that, and then the proposed changes with respect to anonymous complaints sort of is the biggest issues in my mind. Crime Stoppers is anonymous. The police department takes anonymous complaints. I see both sides of the issue, but I'm not sure if doing away with anonymous complaints is what the citizens of Farmers Branch are really going to want. And maybe we need to put these findings out to a larger set of folks to respond to. The other thing that I have that you mentioned briefly is task force member felt it was unfair for residents to file code violations in neighborhoods in which they do not live. Well, I disagree with that because, one, if you pay taxes in Farmers Branch, you live in the city and you have a right to complain about things. Not every council district or neighborhood has office buildings or has other things that need to be attended to. So again, restricting the right of the citizens to notify your department or their council representatives about things that are going on in the city is not, I don't believe, in the best interest of a working city. And then, let's see, I kept going back in my mind after reading this, what are the minimum acceptable standards of living in the city? And granted, most people who own property in the city take care of it, most. Some need to be reminded from time to time as to things that need to be attended to. We also have a lot of renters that live in the city. They don't necessarily take care of property the same way that an owner would, an owner-occupant, that's for sure. So, again, all we want is compliance. We want a clean and well-kept city, and I don't think that's unreasonable. Your job is a tough job. It's a thankless job. It's difficult and trying, and I get that, and we talked about that. But it does serve a purpose, and unfortunately, we have to have it, and unfortunately, there are folks that need to be reminded of these things. So, I guess, how is doing away with some of these codes going to make our city better and cleaner? I have to ask myself that. If language is unclear in some of what is written, then let's have our city attorney address it. Other cities have many of the same ordinances, and from talking to a couple of counterparts in other cities, I don't know that it's as big a problem, but so we should study and do whatever we need to do to help alleviate that, or remedy that, I should say. And then, lastly, when I think about all the people that have invested in Farmers Branch, they moved here for a reason. We're a city and a park, and they expect, because of our motto, they expect the city to sort of look like a park. And what are parks? They're usually nice, neat, and clean. But then we also have people that are tearing down homes and building very expensive homes around our city. Out on the west side, we got very expensive homes going in out there. We have people taking advantage of our demo rebuild program. And we owe it to these people who have invested in our city heavily, and those that have been here for a long, long time, to make sure that their city stays neat and clean. And so I'm interested in hearing where this goes. I know that there's a lot of residents out there that will be very interested to hear where it goes, or they will be here to tell you themselves. So those are my comments. I thank you for letting me speak.
I guess any response from you or?
No, I appreciate all the feedback. Councilman Lynn is correct. We've had discussions between us, and I understand completely a lot of his points of view we've talked about earlier, so I understand completely. So thanks for your feedback.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you, Mr. Bonanno, for the work and the effort in facilitating. And I understand, as you said at the outset, it's not an easy role you were cast in to kind of herd the process, but not give your own input into it. And I'd also like to thank all of the citizen volunteers that stepped up to serve on this committee and task force. And we're always blessed here in Farmers Branch that we have so many people that want to get involved and keep the city going in a good direction. My comments are going to be brief. I basically agree with the comments of the mayor, and I think this was a study that's long overdue. Myself and all of us, we've heard over the years complaints about code enforcement from various angles. I understand all of that. One thing I think was very commendable is doing away with the anonymous complaints, because I think if something is serious enough that someone wants to complain about it, they should put their name on it. And not that that's released to the public, but that it goes on the record. And to think that someone cannot even live in Farmers Branch but file complaints against someone, I mean, it's preposterous, in today's age. It's really preposterous. And so, and I think anonymous complaints opened itself up to abuse, targeting, that's not the purpose. It's for the health and well-being, safety of people, and of course, to keep the city looking nice. And, targeting people, targeting groups does not serve that purpose. So I think this study was long overdue. As you pointed out, and as I heard from some of the task members, several parts of the code were really unworkable and really needed to be reviewed. And I think when we can make it less subjective, it makes your role and the officers' roles easier. It's going to lead to more buy-in and understanding and transparency from all of our citizens. And it's more rational, what you're proposing. So just want to thank you. And I think it was long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Baumgartner.
Yes. Well, I missed the presentation. Sorry, I was at the doctor's. But, I have a couple of thoughts looking back over 6 years of this. And, I think as a town, we're a very conservative town. And we have conservative values. And I know my values are very conservative. And I believe in less government, not more. And, and I would find myself over the past 6 years getting caught by some citizens and identifying a situation and, getting all jacked up and, and find myself arguing against my values. At times. And I think that, we got a city with, 8,400 homes today, going to 88 or 89 when we're finished on the west side. There's always going to be, 1%, right? There's going to be a number of homes that are where people are ill or out of town or struggling financially, whatever, and unable to do this. And I just think that while certainly we need to have some standards, I think they need to be, I think reading about what your priorities for what those standards should be are right for the city. And, and there's been, one of the arguments is it's going to hurt our property values. But all we have to do is we can look at DCAD, at the cities around us, and for the past 5 or 6 years, our property values have been increasing at a higher percentage rate than the cities around us. So whatever we're doing something right. And, from that standpoint, and I don't think it's a couple of tree stumps or, an RV in the driveway or a boat in the driveway or whatever. I don't think those are the things that are going to destroy our property values or impact them really in any significant way. So thank you for your work. I know those committees are hard. And, from reading through the presentation, it sounds like you've done a very thorough job.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. All right, we're going to go back through. Let's try to keep our comments under 3 minutes this time so that we can get on to some other items. Councilmember Rotano.
Sure, I will be brief. Just had two things. Well, the reason why I asked about where the funds went into, like which bucket they went to, is because one thing that I know I've been advocating for is, some type of repair program. And my family's experience, sometimes it's not for the lack of trying or the lack of wanting to make the changes necessary. It's just for the lack of the funds to be able, not for like the high grass, but some of the bigger things. And so something that I would and maybe love to explore is having a fund for those folks that, let's be honest, some of our folks are blue collar workers, they have 2 or 3 jobs, potentially having a fund where we pay a percentage, just like we have with other projects around the city. And so that was the reason behind that, and I would love to explore that with staff to see if it's something that's possible, not for, again, those little things, but some of those bigger things that, again, it's not because people aren't wanting to make the change. Sometimes they just don't have the means to be able to do it. So, and I would hate for them to have to take away from one thing for something like this. And so that's one thing. And then the second thing, was there a discussion amongst you all about how often you're going to actually purposefully look at this particular code policy to be able to make changes? Just like on the state side, when I was working in the ledge, we had sunset for different commissions, different departments, where we knew, okay, this department every 5 years we had to look at this, every 10 years we had to look at that, from a policy perspective. And so, I'm curious to see if that was discussed to say, hey, you know what, maybe as part of the policy we add a clause that states this will be reviewed every 5 years, every 10 years. Maybe something also to think about with other different policies within our city. But curious if that was something that was discussed.
It actually was not, but I do agree with you that, as I said earlier, I think that all codes, not just code enforcement, but a whole variety of codes, should be looked at regularly. Processes and procedures and policies should all be looked at regularly, in my opinion, because they do lose their effectiveness over time and they fall out of relevancy over time.
Definitely.
So I have no problem with some kind of regular review. That was not discussed, but if I had to recommend something, I would recommend perhaps every 2 or 3 years, actually. And then, unless I got other direction from the city manager's office, that's what I would do.
Yeah, and I think we'd have to look at every single one on an individual basis, because obviously we could wait 5 years where something like this we might want to do every 2. So Mayor, that would be something I would love to talk to you about, to see if, with staff, to see if maybe we can start looking at these different codes and try to put a sunset review for those, and really work with staff to figure out what's reasonable, because I do think that this was very beneficial. And so anyhow, I would love to discuss that piece further, but and then also the piece about the fund. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Yeah, Councilmember Rotano, my thoughts would be much like the charter, every 3 to 5 years, something that moves in kind of tandem with a document of that importance. Definitely. So, Councilmember Norwood.
I'll try not to repeat. I think that we need to focus on the big things. We have more code enforcement officers than many of our surrounding cities. And we need to focus on the health and safety of our citizens. And people have a right to enjoy their properties, to not be overly fined, not to be overly burdened by regulations that we put into place primarily from a sense of aesthetics. And so I think that the task force recognized this point, and I think that as you go through this rewrite, of course I won't be here to give my 2 cents about it, which everybody's probably very happy about, but we need to remember people want to enjoy their property, and they don't want to be targeted by people that have chosen to be disgruntled and upset and offended. We have too much of that in our society. We're too polarized. Without being too political here, we need to come together. We need to move towards the middle, and we need to realize that we're not all the same. Farmers Branch is not a homeowners association, and it's not meant to be a homeowners association. And so if that's the level of restriction and beautification that a person desires, then they should move to an HOA. But we should not try to enforce those kinds of standards on a city of in excess of 50,000 now? 48,000, 49,000 people going up above. We'll see what the census comes out with. We've gotten way too big for that. And I just want to say one word in support of the code officers is we've made their jobs overly difficult, and we've focused them on things that really don't matter. It doesn't really matter if you drive by somebody's property and you happen to see a glimpse of a blue bin. Does that really matter? Or does it really matter that perhaps somebody's fence has fallen into disrepair, or maybe and their dog has gotten out, or their pool is unsecured? Those things matter. You know, we need to we need to focus on the health and safety, and a little bit less on the aesthetics. I'm not saying we do away with aesthetics and it's just a wild free-for-all, but we need to allow for discretion in enforcement, and we need to ensure that our code officers are able to perform their jobs without being jerked around to come to look at this immediate thing because we drove by and somebody had grass that we thought was higher than 8 inches. So that's my 2 cents, and I wish you all the best in reviewing this revision when it comes out.
Thank you. Councilmember Lynn.
I would agree with Councilwoman Rentana, and I think what makes probably easy sense is to put this on a same schedule to review with the charter review, and just every 5 years, if I'm not mistaken, that
3 to 5, we call it.
Oh, I thought it was, okay. All right, well, as you all said earlier, I think that makes best sense. 3 years might be a little too soon, but certainly no more than 5. And so we have fresh set of eyes. And when we do this, perhaps we have a fresh set of people also that are involved in the process.
Okay. Councilmember Driscoll.
I'm good, thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Baumgartner.
Yeah, I've already made my comments as well.
Perfect. Leo, do you have what you need to kind of move forward?
I'm good, thank you. And thank you for having me today.
No, thank you again, and to all the task force members. Truly appreciate y'all. Thank you. Next is A3, receive biannual update from the Senior Advisory Board. Ms. Jean.
My name is Jean Trebert, and there's other members here today, Joyce, Deborah, Priscilla, and Matt. Our director's here, Jackie Biles. Rachel's here. And you're here too. Okay, so we've got a lot of people here today. We're glad to be back open. Hi. So here we go. Let's see. Our mission and vision. Our mission is to promote the independence and well-being of older adults in our community through health, wellness, educational, cultural, and recreational services. Our vision is to provide a friendly and active environment with connections through programs and services for older adults within the Farmers Branch community. Meetings and participation. Our monthly meetings conducted through Zoom, with the first in-person meeting being held upstairs on April the 8th. We were back. All meetings have been met the quorum and majority attendance. Our board members made phone calls to members each week and helped inform via Facebook and Nextdoor in regards to activities and events. During the closure, board members informed faculty members of alternative program locations, online activities, and shared information leading up to the faculty reopening. On March 15th, 2021, the Branch Connection reopened its doors after being closed for a full year due to the COVID-19. The first phase of the reopening allowed for limited fitness and recreation classes. The second phase offered full use of the facility as long as patrons complied with mask requirements, social distancing, and had received a COVID-19 vaccination at least 14 days prior to entering the facility. And then it changed again after the governor gave his, we can't do that. Attendance levels have steadily increased to 71% since reopening in March. In an effort to increase membership levels, several membership campaigns and community outreach efforts are underway. Memberships and programs. Virtual and distance programming since October 2020 has served 5,694 program participants. In-person events have included Veterans Day, Bumper Bingo, Drive-In Movie, along with several off-site programs. With many senior centers still closed, the Branch Connection is thriving with 30 new memberships since we reopened on the 15th. All programming has returned to in-person with modified options or virtual components for those unable to attend in person. Large events such as the monthly breakfast, bingo, and weekly dances will return in a phased approach as COVID-19 cases continue to drop. Regularly keeping membership base informed of the new developments has been a big board accomplishment. Contributed hundreds of volunteer hours, we have been working with the vaccine resignation event, the weekly Meals to Go program, Veterans Day, fishing fun, and assisted with staffing in the warming shelter during the winter freeze. We are in the process of developing the Century program for our citizens in Farmers Branch that have turned 100. Provided feedback for several of the larger events held at the Branch Connection. Board member Ruth Foles has received her 5-year service pin for being on the board. And here's Ruth getting her pin, and Beth, one of our board members, at one of the meals. Here we are at Fishing Fun with Deborah, Ruth, and Jean. And that is Laura, and that is Lynn Dre and Laura at the Bumper Bingo. And there I am passing out Valentine's, and it was so cold that day. We were freezing. But we have had a great reopening. We have been very pleased with the amount of participation that has come back. And then we're still doing our Zoom meetings and things for people who don't feel quite safe enough to come in to the building yet. Any questions?
Well, Jean, thank you so much for your leadership. I know you're rolling out of this position, but, and to the fellow board members and past board members, thank you very much for your continued service. I know this last year has been difficult, but the ways that you all have been able to not only work together, but work with staff to try to find ways to not only keep people engaged at the Branch Connection, but also engaged with each other, I think is very important, especially is, some of our more active adults, need that connection a little bit more. So it's very important, and what you guys have done was just tremendous, and truly appreciate that. And I know we talked about phasing some things in, but in terms of the first phase of that, I would love to see us bring the breakfast back as soon as possible, rather than
They
the
had it
drive-through.
Monday. Back at
In person.
I know one man argued with me Friday. He goes, "No, it's here," and I go, "Well, it's in the parking lot."
It's in the parking lot.
He was like, he thought we were coming in the building,
But
they're ready for it. They
I
really
know,
want
and
it.
so, that would be something I would love to see.
The
But
mask mandate will have to be CDC.
just get a little flap or something, I'm just joking.
No, I know.
But, no, truly, thank you. Councilmember Ratana.
No questions, just echo the sentiments. Thank you so much for all of your work, your innovative thought on ensuring that our residents were able to have that opportunity to mingle safely throughout the pandemic. I know it's been hard for a lot of folks, and just the work that you'll do to ensure that you communicate with them is just outstanding. So just want to thank you. I do want to thank Jackie and Rachel, especially during the pandemic when we were trying to get vaccination registrations out to our seniors, and now with the event that we're having in a couple of weeks. Just thank you all for just always being so open and willing to help, and just going above and beyond for us, for your residents, but also for our seniors. So thank you so much, and I appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Crystal.
Councilmember Norwood.
I have no questions. I do think it's great that you had 30 new memberships.
I think the poker game might have had something to do with something. They had a tournament, and there was.
I bet Mr. Rice had something to do with that, didn't he?
I got on the phone and said, you need to be here about 30 minutes early because we see you don't have a membership that we were calling.
And the other thing I just wanted to say was I really commend you, your team, and the senior center, the Branch Connection itself, in all the work you do in making sure that people have meals, and that all the phone calls that you made to just check on people, to health and safety. And so thank you for what you do.
And poor Jackie, he got in this. We didn't even get to see him face to face for a long time.
Yeah.
So it was really, he's done an outstanding job. And Rachel has backed us on lots of things. So, and Mike.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thanks. Councilmember Lynn.
Gene, thank you. Debbie, Priscilla, Matt, Joyce. Y'all did a great job. I mean, you had every obstacle thrown at you with, COVID and a new director coming in who really couldn't come in, and then the freeze and everything else. So it's been a trying year, to say the least. And I know from being at many of the meal giveaways, talking to folks waiting in line and whatnot, what the staff did was very much appreciated, and with all the help that the board provided also, it doesn't go unnoticed. So I just, on behalf of all those folks who told me thank you, I'm just telling you all thank you.
Oh, and by the way, Linda Clark's retiring June 1, and they're going to have a little thing at 11 o'clock if you want to come at the Branch Connection. June the 1st is Linda Clark's last day. And so we're going to have a little reception for her at 11 o'clock on June the 1st. And y'all are welcome to come.
Thank you. Councilmember Driscoll.
Yes, I have no questions. Just like to thank you, Gene, for the tremendous job you've done, and to Jackie and all of the staff, all of the volunteers at the Branch Connection. As many of you know, I walked the line there pretty much every time there was a meal giveaway last year during my campaign, and I've done it many times since, and it's a great opportunity to visit and talk with the seniors, and particularly, in the year we all went through last year, where stress, uncertainty, insecurity, afraid to go out. You guys were a bridge to, an important community, subset community in our city, and you showed unusual flexibility, creativity under the worst circumstances. And, my hat's off to all of you. And I look forward to, the more gradual rolling opening we're doing at the Branch Connection. And I had the pleasure I forgot what it was, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, I can't remember. I participated in my first Branch Connection trivia game, and I did terribly. But it was the first one, so I'll be back. But just like to thank you all very much for the tremendous work you've done.
I forgot until about 6:30, so I didn't even.
Councilmember Baumgartner.
Yeah, I'll just echo the comments of everybody else. It's a great job. I believe we were the first senior center in the area
To open. Yeah.
And, and I think working with the staff and making that happen says a lot about the leadership of the Branch Connection and the leadership of the city and making that happen. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Next is A4, discuss future agenda items. Councilmember Ratana. Norwood.
Well, I was going to put about 15 items on there.
You
but
should.
Since I want a short study session next meeting, I'm not going to have any.
Councilmember Lynn.
I would like to get back on the agenda again with another streetlight review and discussion. I know several of us have said this, and I'd like what Council Member Baumgartner and I started working on to not just die. I think this is probably an apropos time to readdress some of that.
Councilmember Driscoll.
Not at this time.
Councilmember Baumgartner.
None at this time, but I agree with Councilman Lynn that, I think the lighting is a place where we can really impact the look of the city in a really positive way, and it's worth the time and investment in the future.
All right. B, executive session. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to section 551.087 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate regarding, discuss economic development incentives for Project Carry. Council may convene into a closed executive session pursuant to 551.074 of the Texas Government Code to deliberate regarding annual evaluation of the city manager. We will recess and convene upstairs. Be up there about 4:30. Time is 4:22. Thank you.